Soon you will be visiting the Dickson Mounds Museum. Here you will learn about American Indians who have lived in Illinois for thousands of years. Dickson Mounds is a special place to study Indian culture because of where it is located and what has been learned here. The museum stands on a bluff top near the Illinois and Spoon Rivers, a place where Indians once had their hunting and fishing camps, farms, villages, and ceremonial centers. Since there are no written records from people who lived around Dickson Mounds in the distant past, archaeologists and other scientists work together and share the things they learn to understand 12,000 years of environment and culture in Illinois. They revise theories as new evidence is found. Like detectives, archaeologists study the lives of people from the clues they've left behind, such as the remains of their houses, temples, villages, tools, ornaments, pottery, and foods. In addition to studying artifacts, people can learn about life in the distant past by studying the legends and traditions of Indians. Many of their stories and customs are thousands of years old and help to explain the artifacts that archaeologists find. Archaeologists have learned that American Indians have always felt a closeness to the earth and what is grown from it. To the Indians, plants, animals, and people are all related. This is why they care so deeply about nature. The Indians look to Mother Earth as their provider. Remains from the daily life of American Indians show that they depended on plant resources, not only for food, but also for clothing, containers, housing, tools, and transportation. Special ceremonial artifacts point to the fact that life from the earth was greatly respected and honored. The controlled growing of plants was one of the most important discoveries of ancient peoples because it drastically changed their lifestyles and still affects our lives today. Given the importance of farming today, it may come as a surprise that it is a relatively new practice. For 99% of human history, people did not grow plants for food and other necessities. Instead, they depended on what they could find growing wild. The first people who came into Illinois found an Ice Age environment. Small groups traveled frequently over large territories, camping briefly while hunting animals or gathering wild foods from the earth, nuts, roots, tubers, leaves, bark, seeds, and fruits. The people had little control over how much food there would be or where it would be found, and they often moved with each new season to take advantage of the available food sources. Several types of stone tools were made to help collect the wild plants and prepare them for eating. Plants were used for purposes other than food as well. Leaves, stems, wood, and fiber from plants were used to make rope, cord, cloth, baskets, and mats. Wood was used for tools and utensils, canoes, houses, fortifications, and fires. At the end of the Ice Age, dramatic changes in the climate transformed the landscape so much that large herding animals became extinct. Over time, early peoples began to rely more heavily on gathered and stored foods. Eventually, they began to produce their own plant food instead of being fully dependent on wild resources. Gourds were the first plants grown. Later, sunflowers were cultivated. Then plants that we consider weeds today, like lamb's quarters, marsh elder, and pigweed. The seeds from these plants proved to be an excellent food source because they contain oils and carbohydrates that are very nutritious when boiled in soups and stews. By cultivating, caring for plants, and helping them to grow, early gardeners changed their relationship with the land forever. Soon they had a more stable food source to carry them through the winter and provide seeds for spring planting. The actions of people, whether intentional or not, began to change the plants themselves.
Scientists have learned a great deal by studying early plant remains. For example, we would expect that the early peoples would gather seeds where they were most numerous. And the largest seeds are by far the easiest to collect. Plus, it makes perfect sense to save your best seeds to plant the following year. As a result, we would expect that the plants that early peoples grew would come to have many more seeds, and that those seeds would be much larger. Just look at the difference in size between these wild marsh elder seeds and this 3,000-year-old cultivated marsh elder seed.
Remains of grinding and nutting stones, axes and adzes, and pieces of chipped stone are evidence that food processing, woodworking, and tool making were typical activities of this early gardening culture. Eventually, pottery was developed, providing a new method for storing food as well as for cooking it. The first farmers in the central Illinois River Valley were the Indians of the Mississippian culture, who lived here between 600 and 1,000 years ago. The river was one of the major attractions that brought peoples to this area. The river was an important natural resource because it provided water for crops, cooking and cleaning, a habitat for food such as fish and mussels, shells for tools and jewelry, and a means of transportation. The Illinois River Valley was well suited to Mississippian lifeways. Abundant wild species of animals and plants were available for hunting and gathering, and Mississippian farmers made use of the rich soils of their river floodplains for their crops. Archaeological evidence has not yet told us all we would like to know about Mississippian agriculture in this valley. However, much information can be learned from studies of later historic tribes of the southeastern United States who continued a Mississippian way of life until the arrival of the first European explorers in the 16th century. These explorers observed that it was the women who were primarily responsible for cultivating and harvesting the garden plots. Men, who were the hunters and warriors, also made tools necessary to cultivate the gardens and did the heavy clearing needed to prepare fields for gardening.
The Mississippian garden was cultivated with a variety of hand tools. Digging sticks were used for making holes for planting seeds in the garden. The deer was an important resource. Deer antlers were used for making rakes, and deer jaws were used for making sickles for harvesting plants. The hoe was made with short wooden handles. This hoe is made with a deer scapula, which is a shoulder blade. This hoe is made with a mussel shell, and this last hoe is made with a chipped stone blade.
This ancient stone image of a woman with a hoe shows how the tool was used. Most crops were planted in small heaps of earth rather than the rows that are seen today. By A.D. 1200, the Mississippians were planting three staple foods together: corn, beans, and squash. The Iroquois Indians refer to the traditional combination of these three plants as three sisters gardening. According to an Iroquois legend, corn, beans, and squash are three loving sisters who must always dwell together to be happy. Each type of plant helped the other. The stalks of corn provided support for the beans, while the beans added nitrogen to the soil, which helped the corn to grow. The squash grew close to the ground, keeping the soil moist and shading the earth with its wide leaves to help prevent weeds from growing. Legends say that when the moon drops low and the summer night is lit only by the light of the stars, these three sisters come forth in human form, wearing their green garments and decked in blossoms. They dance in the shadows, singing to their Mother Earth, praising their Father Sun, and whispering words of comfort to mankind. The Iroquois call these three sisters Dayan-Heko, which means they sustain our lives. In the Mississippian culture, women were associated with the earth. They were honored because they gave life to children, and as the gardeners, they gave life to plants, caring for both and helping them to grow. Wahanihi, a Hidatsa woman, once said, "We cared for our corn in those days as we would care for a child, for we Indian people loved our fields as mothers loved their children. We thought that the corn plants had souls as children have souls, and that the growing corn liked to hear us singing to them." Aside from tending the crops so that the weeds would not overtake them, women also had to keep predators away. In August, when the green corn began to ripen, a platform might be built in the garden. There, the girls and old women of the household came to sit and sing to prevent crows and wild animals from destroying the crop. Other crop thieves included young boys who stole the green ears of corn to roast. The whole community took part in harvesting and storing the food that was grown. Plant foods were eaten fresh, roasted, boiled, and baked. Seeds and other foods were often ground or pounded with stones, wooden mortars and pestles, or chopped with stone knives before being made into soups, stews, and bread. Hominy and roasted corn on the cob were two favorite dishes. Much of the food was dried and stored for winter. Corn, nuts, and other plant foods were stored in large ceramic pots and deep bark-lined pits. People cooked and ate around the central fire in their houses, and food was stored in pits and jars along the walls. As the roots of agriculture were established, the life way of these people became more complicated, and changes that began in the gardening period continued in the farming period. Plant cultivation tied the people to the land, so they moved less frequently. Populations grew, possibly because of more stable diets and settled lifestyles. The Mississippian farmers built great villages, some with hundreds of residents. Urban centers like Cahokia, near East St. Louis, were home to many thousands of people. The larger populations were characterized by a ranked society in which some people had more power than others. People were organized to perform jobs other than food production. They developed different skills and were able to achieve higher levels of government, technology, art, and ritual. Great chiefs now governed the villages. The chief's responsibilities included overseeing protection of the village, trade with other groups, and the distribution of extra food. They were also in charge of many ceremonies that took place. The importance of farming to Mississippian Indians was reflected in their rituals. There were many community ceremonies and festivals held throughout the year, but the most important, the green corn ceremony, was held in mid-August to celebrate the ripening of the corn crop. It was both a Thanksgiving ceremony and a New Year's celebration held to thank Mother Earth for keeping them alive during the past year, and to renew the relationship between the Great Spirit of the universe and all living things. At this time, the sacred fire which had been kept alight all year was put out, and a new fire was kindled as a symbol of the renewal of all life. The festival included special foods, many dances, and religious rituals. In their excavations of Mississippian sites, archaeologists have found a number of artifacts which might have been associated with the green corn ceremony. Jewelry and ornaments were often decorated with sun symbols. The light and heat of the sun were of vital importance to Mississippian farmers. This small stone figure depicts a woman kneeling by a panther-headed snake that represents the powers of the earth. As she strikes the creature with her hoe, it is changed into a squash vine which grows around her. The figure represents woman bringing crops from the earth. The rainfall needed by crops was called for in rituals by holy men using rattles to imitate the sound of thunder. Gourd and turtle shell rattles were also used in dances, and some women wore shell ankle rattles. Some forms of the green corn ceremony have survived to the present day. The ceremony is still practiced by tribes such as the Creek Nation of Oklahoma. The Mississippians had a great respect for the earth, but as their populations increased and their villages expanded, they began to deplete the natural resources until they had to move their communities to unoccupied areas. Beginning about AD 1300, conflict increased in the valley as new groups arrived. Warfare, which stemmed from competition for resources and status, became more frequent. But nothing was to transform the lives of the American Indians more quickly than the arrival of the Europeans here in the 1680s. American Indians taught the Europeans how to live off this land by introducing them to new species of animals to hunt, fish, and trap, and plants to cultivate. Europeans introduced the American Indians to such new crops as watermelon and peaches, and to metal tools to work the land. The 150 years following the arrival of the French in Illinois were a time of changing friendships, cooperations, and conflicts. Indians became aligned with European groups, French, British, and American, that were often at war with one another. By the late 1840s, all American Indian tribal groups were removed from the state. Today, this land in the Illinois River Valley is being farmed more than ever. Illinois is part of North America's Corn Belt, and corn continues to be the largest crop. Corn is still a favorite food, and in one way or another, nearly every American uses products containing some part of corn each day. Corn is refined and used in products like carbonated drinks, peanut butter, cereals, ice cream, chewing gum, soap, glue, plastics, paper, and fuel. Scientists continue to find new uses for corn, one of our most important gifts from American Indians. The growing of corn is just one example of how much we depend on farming in our daily life. The uses of corn and many other resources from the earth are endless. As you look at the farm fields of Illinois, think of the fields that came before and of the people who tended them. When you come to Dickson Mounds, you will see artifacts, experiment with natural resources, and learn games and legends that explore how Indians of the Illinois River Valley lived and viewed life from the earth. Here you can discover some of Earth's gifts and how they help us to live.